only numbers in terms of majorities and minorities, but also in terms of budgets. And budgets today have become holy, they have become totems, in the sense of some truths above us to which we have to comply. We always have to comply to numbers, to budgets, and mostly, of course, budget cuts. And that's the democracy of austerity. It's the democracy of poverty. As we see today in Greece, there's a new party already, well, a few months in power, Syriza, but it's not able to talk about a social program here in Europe because discussions and talks about such a program can be ignored by referring to numbers and by referring to budgets. In this context, I would like to refer to the philosopher Boris Groys, and he says that in capitalism, language is being annulled. And the ultimate confirmation of refutation of human action under capitalism is not linguistic, it's economic. It's not expressed in words, it's expressed in numbers. Yet, Boris Groys continues, the possibility of politics, is connected to the question of language, of arguments, of contestation, of alternatives. They are all expressed in language, they are not expressed in numbers. And people can only become political through language. That's also a definition coming from Hannah Arendt, who says democracy is standing in front of each other, to talk, to be heard, to be listened to listen yourself. And democracy in that sense is also related to the possibility to assembly, to come together and discuss, as you are doing in the context of Rethink. We need places where we can discuss, where we can confront each other with words, and think about decisions that that can be made. These are places where people who have been silenced by numbers, can come together and get a voice again, express themselves again. And I will return to that later again. Well, in a sense, the talk, the issue I'm going to talk about this evening is also linked to that linguistic turn. It's linked to the possibility of politics, the ability to make decisions and to stand in front of each other and to assembly. And this brings me to the actual subject I was supposed to talk about this evening, and that's the subject of the democratic alternative, the democratic experiment, which is unfolding in Rojava. I think we have somehow came to know about it, or most of us at least, when Kobani, that small town in the north of Syria, in Rojava, became assaulted, was under siege of the Islamic State. And before I come to that democratic experiment, I would like to say a few words about that Islamic State and the announcement of the Caliphate. And many times the references to the Islamic State and the reference to the Caliphate come together with the idea as if the Islamic State will bring people back to many hundred years ago. And that we are dealing with an organization which prepares people for a long march back into history. But what I think when we look at the Islamic State is that it is, in a sense, a very modern movement. What the Islamic State is trying to accomplish is the development of a state, it's the Islamic State, the development of a state which is based on a singular identity, and that's their interpretation of Sunni Islam. And everyone who does not comply, who does not has the characteristics of that identity is being expelled by violence, but also the material expressions of their identities, the shrines or particular forms, or other kinds of mosques which are not Sunni but Shia. Everything, all the material expressions which do not comply to that Sunni Muslim identity are being destroyed, and people are being killed or being expelled. And I think that the development of these kinds of states are very close. So the development of such kind of state as the Islamic State is trying to accomplish is in fact very close to the modern idea of the nation state, which also has been founded upon a particular identity. If we look to the case of Turkey, there we see a state which has been founded on the definition of a Turkish identity. In Iraq and in Syria, based on Arab nationalism. And if you did not comply to that identity, you also had a very, very difficult life. And many people also lost their lives because they did not want to live in states defined by such a particular ethnic, in this case, identity. So the Islamic State in that sense resembles very much what we have seen before under Arab nationalism or Turkish nationalism, but in a sense in a more radical form, one could say, but also it has become more visible. We have seen massacres under the name of nationalism, under the name of ethnic nationalism also in the past, but then we didn't have Twitter and Facebook and television to expose those massacres. But that's the model of the Islamic State, and that's the model that they tried to bring to Rojava in September 2014 with their third assault. It was already the third assault on Kobani. If we compare that model with the model of people who defend Rojava, and that's a model which comes from the Kurdistan Workers' Party, a previously Marxist organization, pretty much Marxist inspired, but now organized thinking, working along the ideas of what is mostly referred to as radical democracy. The model they try to develop in Rojava is a model which is based on pluriformity, on plurality, but it's also based on self-government in the sense of developing autonomous structures, autonomous initiatives, a form of council democracy from the local level up. So basically decisions are taken at the very local level, at the level of neighborhoods and the level of villages, and this is somehow upscaled to what we could refer to as higher levels. And that means that at a certain moment, if people at a neighborhood or in a particular village cannot come to an agreement or cannot solve an issue because it's an issue which is not only involve or impacting the neighborhood or the village they live in, then they upscale it to a higher level. So it's a bottom-up model of self-government, which they are experimenting with already since 2-3 years in Rojava, but also already since many more years in the southeast of Turkey, where they try to develop similar structures parallel to the state. Let me say a few words more about that project, but then in their terms, as they describe it. And when we look to this project, they describe this project with 3 concepts, and they're not very fancy or catchy concepts, but they are very interesting, I think, to consider. They refer to them as with the concepts of democratic republic, with the concept of democratic autonomy, and the concept of democratic confederalism. And these three concepts together, they function as a reorientation of politics. And it's in such a way a reorganization that it moves away from demanding things, and that's mostly how we understand politics. Demanding, having demands, expressing demands by petitions or by demonstrations or other forms. They move away from demanding things to enacting change. So they don't demand, they enact. They do demand for change, they want to be the change. So that's the main underlying principle of those three concepts of democratic republic, democratic autonomy, and democratic confederalism. But let me explain those concepts a bit more. Democratic republic is maybe from the three projects the one which is still a bit oriented towards the state. And what it aims at is a dissociation of democracy from nationalism, or from demos, from ethnos. And this can be understood against the background of nation states, of nationalism in their case the Middle East, but I think we can also extrapolate it to other countries or other areas. Concretely, this means that this project of democratic republic, that it aims at proposals for a new constitution. A constitution in which citizenship is not defined in ethnic terms, but in which citizenship is defined in civic terms, in terms of civil rights. That's new, because if we look at constitutions in the Middle East, the constitution of Turkey, citizenship is equated to Turkishness. And in the former, we may say former Arab National Republic of Syria, or of the Republic of Iraq, citizenship is equated with Arabness. So this association of ethnicity from democracy is an important, I think, important step towards democratization and a move away from politics of assimilation. Then we have the project of democratic autonomy. And in this context, autonomy does not refer to a form of sub-sovereignty, which is granted by the state to institutions within this state, but it refers to that form of active citizenship to which I referred before. Decision taking at a local level by people themselves. From that local level, bottom up. It means that at the local level you can decide upon education yourself, also the language of education yourself. You can decide about the kind of religious institutions you want to have, or the local economy, how you organize the economy. Decisions about that are made on the local level. But in this sense, in this case, the local level does not mean a kind of not in my backyard, a kind of parochial, inward-oriented localism. And that's why they also introduced the concept of democratic confederalism. Confederalism in the sense of connectivity, being connected to one another, and taking also responsibilities in the face of one another. An interconnected form of autonomy in which people try to enact things themselves. When we look at these concepts, they are not completely new. I think these concepts, they come from the work of a radical political ecologist, and maybe some of you have heard of him. His name is Murray Bookchin. Murray Bookchin is, well, as I said, a radical political ecologist. I think he died a couple of years ago in 2006 or 7, I'm not sure. But he wrote about two basic ideas of politics, and he referred to them as the Hellenic model of politics and the Roman model of politics, which gave rise to two different imaginaries of politics and two different understandings of government. And the first model, the Hellenic model, stands for participatory, communal forms of politics. And that's a form of politics to which Bookchin himself found himself close. And the second model, which he refers to as the Roman model, it stands for a centralist and statist form. It's a form of politics which he rejects. And the Roman model, the argument goes, has become the dominant form of politics in modern society, informing the American and the French constitutionalists in the 18th century, while the Athens model exists as a counter and as an underground current, finding expression, among others, in the Paris Commune of 1871, the councils, the Soviets, the councils in the springtime of the revolution in Russia in 1970, the Spanish Revolution in 1936. But we can also find this counter-current being expressed in movements as Via Campesina. The statist model, Bookchin argues, that centralized Roman model that has a herd of subjects. But the Hellenic model has an active citizenship. And this is the model which is being practiced in Rojava. So it's somehow standing in a very different tradition of doing politics, but also it's a tradition of doing politics. It's not that the council form of democracy which they are practicing in Rojava is something which comes out of the blue, which has no precedence. It has a long history. It's linked to an undercurrent in politics. To an undercurrent in politics. We can also find not only linkages from this idea to political history. As I said, we see the same model being practiced in a sense in the Via Campesina movement. For example, in the movement of landless workers, the MST in Brasilia. We see it also very clear in the model which is being implemented by the Zapatista. And it's very interesting to see or to read the text of the Zapatista, but also to read text, for example, of that Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, or affiliated organizations. That the language they use, it's in a way it's very similar. They use typical references to communal democracy, the terms confederalism. They use so that they have. It's a similar kind of language they use, but it's also because they are linked to that similar kind of undercurrent of politics, which I talked about. Well, let me say a few words. Let me say a few words more. And I think that if you look at those concepts and actions, that they somehow address a couple of problems we have in democracy today. And the first one is the separation between sovereign power and people. Separation between sovereign power and people. It's a separation which is raised, among others, by different thinkers, as Hannah Arendt, but also, and she is in fact quite a conservative thinker, Hannah Arendt, but also by people who are well, let's say the icons of the anti-globalism movement, such as Antonio Negri and Michael Hart. They argue, hard and naked, they argue that in the early 18th century modern conceptions of democracy was considered the rule of everyone by everyone, held accountable and removable by the majority of people. It's very far away from that 18th century conception. And the problem is, according to Hardenegri, that when you work in a form of representative democracy, that the representatives, that they somehow connect you maybe to power, but they also separate you from power. At the moment, you are represented, you do not rule yourself anymore. And they, Hardenegri, they define democratization as every movement which makes the separation between people and the possibility to rule themselves, between people and power, smaller, to make that separation smaller. I think that's a key issue. In the politics we are witnessing in Rojava. It's a key issue. It also, when you look further, it's also the form of politics which is being implemented in Rojava. It also tries to separate, tries to address the separation by people themselves. Hannah Arendt, she says that politics occurs when people stand in front of each other and debate and discuss with each other. Politics is a public affair. It also needs public spaces. I started with that in the beginning. And politics is not a private choice of vote. She refers to the private choice of vote as a relation between buyers and sellers. And that's it. Politics is not a private affair. Politics is a public affair. It needs public debate, and it needs standing in front of each other and discussing together and making decisions. So it's not only addressing the form of council democracy in Rojava. It's not only addressing the separation between people and power, but it's also addressing the separation of people from one another. Is that easy? Is it easily to be done? No, it's not. When I did interviews with people, they said that, and I cite. It was an interview not in Rojava, but it was an interview in a large city in southeast of Turkey, where they do the same type of democracy. But they said that our aim is to face the problems in our lives, in our neighborhoods, and solve them by ourselves without being dependent on or in need of the state. We try to live without the state. However, the person tempered, the idea of the state is nested in the minds of people, and it's very difficult to make people think about politics without making reference to the state. So we are both practicing self-organization as well as learning to understand what it is by doing it. So it's a learning process. It's a process of learning which is not easy, because I think that in the kind of democracy in which we live, we somehow have been unlearned the skills of citizenship, the skills of active citizenship. And maybe I can close off by making a reference to the form of democracy which they had in the old Greece. Not that old Greece must be our example, but somehow it shows how we have been unlearned the skills of citizenship. In Greece, every 2 years, 1,000 people were randomly selected, and they were distributed over the different institutions they had, and they made the government for that year. At random selection of people who then made up the institutions of government. I don't think that this is a form of politics which it's a form of politics which we cannot imagine. We have made from politics a profession, and it's very far from our daily lives. Well, what I think the projects which we are seeing, which we are witnessing, the experiment in Rojava is bringing politics back into the daily lives. Not, as I said, in the form of demanding things, but in trying to organize the daily lives according to their own desires. Well, this is what I briefly wanted to talk about today. Well, if there are questions, issues you want to engage with, you're welcome.
So first of all, thank you. And yeah, I do have a question because when talking about that kind of stuff, I always get the question, and I'm looking for good arguments there, that decision making in this kind of places must take a lot more time, right? Like, and how do people cope with that in terms of that it takes so much time that they maybe have less time for daily jobs?
Well, indeed, it takes a lot of time. When you talk with people in the region, it seems sometimes as if they are running from one meeting to another meeting, and that's time intensive. But I think when we look at politics today, wherever in the Netherlands or somewhere else, it also takes a lot of time. I don't think that politics, do not take time. But indeed, they take time. But the most important thing maybe is that people are now able to take decisions about which also affect their own lives. In the past, you had, especially also of course in Syria, but also in Turkey, a state which decided upon you, and mostly not in a way which was very much favored by people themselves. And now it's in a way it's for the first time that they are able to talk things which affect them. These are also things which are very down to earth. It's a primary school. It's the language of education. It's the possibility to celebrate religious or cultural festivities, which were formerly prohibited. It's about how to organize the market. It's about the distribution of fuel. It's about the distribution of bread, of course, very important in a war economy as Syria now is. So, in a way, it takes time, especially if you want to develop more long-term. That's already, of course, part of the concept, long-term. It takes time, but it's the way it functions.
Thank you very much. It was a really interesting story. I have a little comment. Isn't the state, as we know it now, not also? It's also made by self-organization. It's a very slow process. It became bigger and bigger and bigger. But you told about if the state doesn't that was my first comment. but I want to point out that it's a kind of a paradox. On one hand, you want to organize yourself again, but there is already we already did it. And another thing is when democracy is becoming accountancy, and there isn't really a fundamental new or another alternative of to choose for in politics, then you do not really have the right or the freedom to choose for an alternative, and then maybe democracy is becoming, well, there is no democracy, maybe less democracy. I don't know how to to make them as a question.
Okay, thank you very much. Then let me try to formulate a kind of a response. I started with the numbers, and I started with the accountancy democracy, which is a democracy which is about numbers. And when democracy is being expressed in numbers, then this comes together with a annulment of language. The numbers are becoming, as I said at the beginning, the kind of totems, the holy things to which we have to comply. And when I said that, I said that in reference to that philosopher Boris Groys, but I also said that in response or in relation to what we see happening in Greece. In Greece, people try to develop an alternative. They try to develop an alternative for austerity. And what we see in the European Union, in the Troika or the institutions as they has been rebranded and renamed, is that every debate is smoldered in numbers. It's smoldered in budgets. There's no possibility to talk politics facing the numbers. That's the first point I wanted to make, and that for a political turn we need a linguistic turn. We need to go away from the numbers. We need to be able to debate and contest, etc. That's also important, I think, in the face of the right. The Student Council got recently the right to approve the university budget every year. I think the right, it's okay, it's good that you have the right to approve that budget, but it should not be limited to a for or against. What is important, I think, is to develop a language in talking about budget, and maybe a language in formulating alternatives, also an alternative budget, not as the new numbers which has to govern, but as a way to contest, as a contestation of a kind of market thinking and number thinking at our universities today. We have to capture the language again. We have to be able to discuss directions again, and not plus or less whatever. The direction of our research, the direction of our education. That's the issue at stake, and not a few million more or less. Because that's on the university budget. It's peanuts. The other issue it's about democracy and the state. What we have seen over that's also something which is being said to people I talked to from that region, from Rojava. They said, well, when you look at the state 150 years ago, it was very small compared to civil society. Many things in there, 150 years ago, they were somehow arranged and organized by and in civil society. And not that we have to idealize civil society, because there can also be a lot of repression in civil society, but there was a large and huge civil society in which people somehow engaged with issues. But if we look at the situation today, we have very strong and large states and a very small, minor civil society, especially when we look at the region I talked about. And I think one of the things people are trying to do in that area is somehow appropriating the tasks, the responsibilities, the actions which states used to do until recently, and do it themselves. And they do it in a very different way. Because when you look at the way the states function, well, the state in Turkey, or the state in Syria, or what's left of it, it's a state of assimilation. It's a state in which people are subjected, in which they are, in which you have the relation between, let's say, the sovereign and the subaltern. And that is what they try to change. They don't want to be the subaltern of the state. They don't want to be the subject. What they want to do is, what they want to be is the people who have the abilities and the capabilities and the powers to decide themselves. And that's not then something they decide from the state, but it's something they simply enact. In a way, despite of all the terror we see in Syria, in a way it was for those in Rojava relatively easy to do, because the state collapsed. Most of the state collapsed. So they did not have other alternatives, either building up a new state or trying to do it in a different way. And what we see is that they do not try to build a new state which replaces the old state, but that they try to do things in a different way. And that's a search. Yeah? There are no blueprints. There may be previous experiences of people who also tried to do it in the past, and of others who try to do it today, as the Zapatista tried to do it in their ways, and the MST in their way in Brazil. So there are similar organizations who have similar types of search, but there's not a blueprint to adopt. So it's really a search for an alternative form of democracy, one which is based on active citizenship, on communal participation. And that's a form of democracy which is very far away, I think, from the representative democracy we have here, we know.
I do have a question. I think I don't need the microphone, right? Maybe.
No.
Yeah, I do have something to say about the Zapatista as well, and how they organized itself and afterwards. So they tried to distract themselves completely from the state, but they relied for that really on a new international community that was based on the internet. So they created their own, maybe you could say even state, by the international community on the internet. But what you see now, so there are 5 of these communities, caracoles, still left. And because they get less and less attention, because they actually also start to distract themselves from the international platform, that they also lose their power within that. So they distract themselves from the state, but now they, for example, if you compare it, I always thought that they were really similar in their organization with, for example, the Via Campesina. But now you see that the Zapatista movement actually is moving itself away from that platform as well, from that, because they are not they try to distract themselves also from the international community by their search for their independence. So from their independence on that. So I think then the state could be like another international community on the internet, for example, and that you need something like founding from within, because otherwise there's no support. And I think that's, for example, a problem now with the Zapatista.
Well, Interesting, and obviously you know more about what's happening in Chiapas than I do. But the issue of connectivity and connecting to others, it's a very important one, and I think I briefly referred to that in the beginning of my talk also. They can connect to us. What we see now is that also parts in the north of Iraq, and that part where the Yazidi lived and where they live still, which had been under assault also of the Islamic State. People who thought that they would be protected by a proto-state in northern Iraq, which simply withdrew and left them in fact, to slaughter by Islamic State. That also people in that area, that they started to organize themselves according that ideal self-government, and that they said, well, we are the fourth region. In northern Syria, you have three regions in which they work according to this model. They said, well, we will be the fourth. So they also connected now to that model of self-organization we have seen in northern Syria, and that's, I think, in a sense interesting, because this is a model which cuts through borders. In a way, it also abolishes borders. Without taking borders explicitly as an issue. They don't say we are against borders, but in the way they organize themselves, borders are being abolished, are being annulled. So that's, I think, an interesting thing of that working, and that also shows, in a way, a difference with state formation. State formation is always about, it comes together with creating borders. They are concerned, there's an obsession with borders and surveying borders. But in the model they are practicing, you see that the borders are disappearing. Even though when you talk about this, and when you talk about, well, I talk about these forms of self-organization which we see. Maybe sometimes we think, well, what's the difference with how politics are being done in the Netherlands? Well, maybe you can see the difference in these kinds of characteristics, that the results are very different from what we see in the way we are used to think about democracy.
Yeah, everyone can hear me, right? I'm just wondering, because I would love to connect the whole thing with democracy, what you just talked about, also to the university and education as a whole, because I'm wondering if people organize themselves to find new ways of democracy and organize themselves as self-democracy and self-responsible people. But they can only use the knowledge we have at this point. How would you say what would need to change in terms of education for people to think outside the box? Because I think what we're basically aiming at is a sort of paradigm shift, and I think that is really hard if people are not educated to think outside of what is already there and only being told what is already there. And if this doesn't happen, there's always, I think, the danger that people who organize themselves just end up at the same situation that we're in right now. So, what would, in your opinion, be a good step to get out of this circle?
That's a difficult question.
Yeah.
But what I would say, what we need at all different places and levels, that we need debate and discussion. That's important. We need debate and discussion about the directions we are going through, the directions which are being chosen, and what we too much hear also from the managers is things are being decided in The Hague, or things are being decided somewhere else, and we have to comply. We always have to comply, to comply. That is what we have to do. I think that what we need is to go away from the idea that we have to comply apply. We need to debate about what kind of university we want to have, and about the type of education. And if such a debate would occur, I think, bringing as an issue that we need a university where we have critical thinking and critical reflection. I think that at this university, but that's my opinion. But that's something which maybe could be confronted with others' opinions. And then we have a debate that we have at this university too much design. It's too much design. We need also critical thinking and critical reflection. And in the end, we want students, we want people, we want citizens who are not only able to act instrumental, which in a way is designing. It's instrumental, but also able to think substantial, to think conceptual, to think critically. And that's what I think is needed at this university. But it all starts with the ability to the possibility to discuss and to contest, and not to be confronted with the word comply. No, we want a discussion about what universities should stand for and the kind of research and education we want to have. And that's a debate which we all have to be able to engage with, the students, the employees, everyone. And that's not the practice of today, unfortunately.
I had another question, and I want to come back on the language thing about we need to change our way of talking, and I was thinking of some articles I read of Rutger Bregman from The Correspondent, and it reminded me about the way we nowadays think of economics, that we disconnected the philosophy and the ethics from the numbers. So you propose that we brought those two back together also in like the discussions with the board of directors, because nowadays and everything is about the numbers, as you said. But is it the ethics and is it the philosophy that is that we need back into these spaces of discussion? And also my second question is also partly connected to that, is how could we change the university? And if we look, for example, at the situation in Syria, in Kobani, in Rojava, and what could we learn from that situation, and how could we implement this in, for example, an imaginary university?
Well, if I had the answer, or if that answer could be readily given, then probably we had not a rethink at this university. The whole initiative of rethink already points into the direction that we have to start thinking about, well, what then? If there is an alternative, the message of the budgets, it's a TINA. There is no alternative. But if there is an alternative, then we have to formulate the alternative, and we have to think about the alternatives. And that's well, I don't know. That can be done in many different ways. But maybe there's one nice example I could give, and that's only one example. And there are probably many different ways. But 1 or 2 years ago, at the cultural geography group, a group of students, they designed, they thought about their own course. A course which they said, well, we get a lot of courses here at this university, also at cultural geography, we get a lot of courses, but we miss elements of politics, discussions about politics. And they started the course. They were supported by some of the critical lecturers at cultural geography. And I think, well, this year they had the course for the second time. Well, this is, I think, in a way, a critical thinking and a critical attitude being translated into a new optional course. But of course, many different things one could do. But what it all is about well, sitting together as students or sitting together as staff, talk and discuss about the things that lack or the things you would like to have, and then not go to the board and or to the chair to ask for them to organize a course, but try to organize it yourself with support of critical staff. It's the enactment of the change. That's also what's happening in Rojava, in the democratic experiment there. It's enacting the change, doing it yourself. And that's also an example of doing it yourself. But it all starts with coming together, sitting together, facing each other, discussing issues, and trying to come to conclusions and solutions. I think.
Okay, because I think I will forget my questions because I had it in mind the whole time. I don't know, this question is maybe a little bit general, but what you said before, that people need to come back and discuss this. The point is, I think the underlying thing here is how did we reverse that process of unlearning that you referred to, and how do we repoliticize people to be able to discuss that, to bring, as you said, the politics back into the public, because I think that's what we're struggling here, and that's what many other movements are also struggling with. And especially because it seems quite comfortable for people to not have to think about politics. So maybe you have some ideas on how to manage that better, or how to get back into the minds of people.
Well, I don't know if I would give a different answer from the answer I just gave. It's about doing it yourself, and it's about learning it by doing it. It's about the enactment and the experience, and learning from the experience of doing things together. I think that's also the message of. Do you know Raj Patel? He's an activist, also from the food sovereignty movement, and what he says is, well, we live today in a complainocracy. It's a complainocracy. So we've voted out those politicians who disappointed us. And replace them for politicians who yet have to disappoint us. That's the complainocracy. Sitting on your couch, watching television, and then expecting that change is being brought to you as a fresh pizza, hot and steaming. It's of course exaggeration, but in a sense it's exaggerated description of demanding change and then waiting until it's being brought to you. Instead of demanding and waiting, it's about trying to do it yourself. That's the whole issue. The whole issue about, and well, you can't do it on your own. that's also clear. So you need other people, and if you have other people, you need the discussion, you need the debate, and then to try to come somewhere to a particular point in which you say, well, these are the things we're going to do. Like those people at the cultural geography who started that course. I think we also had it in the faraway past at Wageningen. Similar initiatives from critical student groups who thought about courses which stimulated critical thinking and critical approaches. Well, that's one thing, and probably there are many other things, but that needs to be discussed and debated among students and staff.
Also not only for the university, but really for for the whole of society. But thank you.
Yeah, I have a practical question. How do those models deal with the with sort of forms of populism? Because if you move away from numbers and you go to language as a basis for democracy, then the persons who are most capable of I don't know, doing this language or formulating this language in their terms, and maybe also the people who are the most charismatic or are just the most assertive in a group like this will have a bigger vote or have more say than people who are not so assertive or are not really capable of translating their wishes into languages. How do those models cope with that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's also at the same time a very critical issue. The way they deal with it today is maybe twofold. What they started with is developing a kind of a social contract. I think the whole concept of a social contract comes from Rousseau, the French philosopher. A social contract in which they somehow defined some basic principles about equality, about gender equality, about ethnic and religious. Well, a social contract in which they developed some basic principles. That's one thing, and the second thing is that there is a very strong social movement which already exists for several decades, and which pays a lot of attention to education, a lot of attention to these kinds of debates. That's the way how they deal with it today, and it works out. It seems pretty well. But that's of course not a guarantee for the future. But this is the way how they deal with it today.
Can I add something? I think that what you're saying is a lot of people, they don't know how to put words to it, right? It's what you're saying, that some people they have a different personality and they don't know how to discuss or debate, or I think there's many ways to show that you're not happy with something, or many ways to show differences, and one way is art. So a lot of introvert people, they express through art, and that's really powerful, maybe even more powerful than words. Another way is physical, like manifest on the street. I mean, every way, in my opinion, every way of trying to manifest is good. Everybody has their own way. So somebody does it in a political way with words and tries to get into politics. The other one tries to do it with art, and the other one is standing on the street in front of the tank. You know, that's a really famous image. So we all find our way. The important thing is to get to know yourself and your way, and then you find your place in this. You will find your place as long as you get to know yourself in your way, I think.
Yeah, but I think that's the side of it, but there's also another side of it that people who are not able to do that, maybe it's a bit extreme, but sometimes they turn to violent. Oh, sorry. Sometimes people turn to violent acts because they're frustrated, because they are they feel they are not heard enough in the society, and things like that. And I think well, it's maybe not only the problem in models like this, but also in the democracy we have right now.
For example, really an organized nation state attacks some of this autonomous organization, because I mean that's a really uneven game, because for such self-organized structures, for example, it makes no sense to have a secret police or something, or how do you call it, like spy agency or whatsoever, because I mean everybody's part of the political also, so they can also be a top player that would be secret, which I like. But still, I think basing an organized nation state, which probably will happen at some point, because as you said before, the nation states are mostly territorial. It might be an easy target to extend your territory, like such an autonomous organization.
Well, I think the best example we have seen in Kobani last year, when the Islamic State attacked Kobani. And Kobani is a very small town. It's not larger than Wageningen is, and it was under attack of Islamic State. And we have seen the progress of Islamic State when they attack huge cities like they attacked Mosul, which is a huge city. They attacked Kobani. There's a massive attack, and they were very committed to defend themselves, and in a certain way, by mobilizing the public opinion, not only regional but also international, they managed to turn the struggle for Kobani. And Kobani is not military strategic, but they managed to turn it into a huge political issue, which led to also the intervention of the coalition or the United States. But it all started with their own capacities to defend themselves. When the Islamic State, which is the major military force now in the region, when they attacked the Yazidi in northern Iraq, it was not the state of Iraq which was able to defend them. It was also not the proto-state in northern Iraq, the Kurdistan regional government, a proto-state. They were also not able to defend the Yazidi. It were in fact the militias of the autonomous communities who took the defense and to manage to create a corridor in which many people could escape from the area, which saved thousands of lives. So if you talk about resilience, or if you talk about the capacity to defend yourself, I think that there are they showed that they are able to do that.
But I have my knowledge about the Islamic State is not deep enough to know because at least it sounds like that what they do, that obviously do with force, like the extension of the territory, but I don't know if it might be different to fight against the Islamic State or fighting against long-established state organization that actually has those secret service structures and all of that, because what we saw a lot in the history was when people tried to national alternatives or tried to set it up, that there was some sort of foreign intervention that was, for example, sparking a coup or something. So, but I mean, I see that people might be more committed because they're not just taking orders, but they're fighting for their own livelihood. So the motivation is there, I guess. But yeah, I wonder how somebody would cope with that they're, I don't know, by setting up different settings that turn out to be aggressive if there's no countermeasures you can engage. Okay. Anybody else has questions? Or? Okay, but yeah, thank you so much. It's so nice having you here.
Thank you very much and success with rethinking.
Thank you.